researcher of American Perpetual Calendar Clocks. He's a board member and he's the Artifacts Committee Chair of the American Clock and Watch Museum. He's a graduate of West Dean's College of Conservation of Clocks and Related Objects. And he's going to talk today about the Calendar Clock Company of Curtisville, Connecticut. It was an early perpetual calendar clock manufacturer, right?
Right. Thank you. Thank you, Howard. It is a privilege to be here today to talk to you about the history of American perpetual calendar clocks. Today's presentation is about a company that Dale Besky and I knew little to nothing about 2 years ago. In addition to sharing what we have learned about the Calendar Clock Company, the presentation also covers a bit of our journey of discovery. Though we know a lot more today, there are still many questions looking for answers. First, a little background information. When American companies first started to manufacture and sell calendar clocks in the middle of the 19th century, they were all perpetual, not simple calendars that had to be adjusted for short months with less than 31 days. They didn't need to differentiate between the two with their customers. After 23 years selling their calendar clocks, the Seth Thomas Clock Co. in their 1883 catalog offered the drop octagon calendar, a simple calendar. This catalog was the first time Seth Thomas wrote perpetual calendar under the parlor and office calendars. Apparently, some customers didn't catch this and were expecting the drop octagon to be perpetual also. The 1886 catalog specifically noted that our drop octagon calendars are not perpetual ones. So, what do I mean by a perpetual calendar? Well, first level perpetual calendar adds the extra day in February on a leap year, which is any year that is divisible by 4. The second level perpetual calendar skips the leap year on any years divisible by 100. And the third level adds the leap year back in if the year is divisible by 400. All mass-produced American perpetual calendar clocks are first level perpetual. In the year 1900, newspapers were letting their readers know that those fancy calendar clocks are not going to be correct this month. I think having to take them to the jeweler's shop seems a little excessive. You can just advance the date manually. But then again, I'm a clock guy. This was not an issue in 2000, since it is divisible by 400. So, on to the story of the Calendar Clock Company of Curtisville, Connecticut. In 1802, Gideon Putnam erected a tavern to accommodate travelers coming to the natural springs in Saratoga, New York. By 1820, additional buildings had been erected to house a ballroom, parlor, and a large dining room. By the 1830s, it had expanded several times and was now called Union Hall. Saratoga Springs was a popular destination. In July of 1843, they had 3,500 visitors in just 1 week. The Putnam family still continued to operate the hotel with various partners. In 1864, they sold the hotel to Warren and Charles Leland. They immediately started to expand the hotel again and would continue to do so into the 1870s. This picture shows the 5-story brick front that was built with an iron balcony 34 feet wide by 300 feet long running along the street. It is now called the Grand Union Hotel. With continuous updates through the 1870s, it could accommodate up to 2,000 guests, making it the largest hotel in the world. For the care and feeding of their guests, they employed 35 cooks, 200 waiters, and 12 carvers. Daily rations included 1,200 quarts of milk, 1,500 pounds of beef, 80 chickens, and 250 quarts of strawberries. This is a stereographic card used in a stereoscope to give the user a 3D image of a picture. Stereoscopes were very popular in the mid to late 19th century. Charles Bierstadt, one of America's great stereographers, traveled the world to create his images. He visited the Grand Union Hotel and created several stereographic cards during his stay. This card is of the hotel's parlor. This stereograph by William Baker was created between 1870 and 1880. It is titled Office of the Grand Union Hotel, Saratoga, New York. Located behind the front desk on the wall is the Grand Wall Clock. Here's a better image showing the monumental wall clock that was purchased to adorn the lobby of the Grand Union. In addition to displaying the time of day, it showed the day of the week, day of the month, and the month of the year, and did so automatically, correcting for the short months and leap year. This stereograph card from Bierstadt is also of the office or lobby of the Grand Union Hotel and was taken circa 1880. Again, we see the monumental wall clock hanging over the front desk. Who created this perpetual calendar clock, and where were they located? Was this the one-off, or were they manufacturing them in quantity? In the June 1954 issue of the NAWCC Bulletin, Harold Clock of Fayetteville, New York, sent in photographs of the Grand Union Hotel clock, which he had restored. He replaced an electrical movement, which had been installed in 1923, with the original mechanical movement for the new owners, the Beaches Restaurant in Rome, New York. He states that I have been informed through reliable sources that there were only 2 of these clocks made by the Calendar Clock Company. Harold Clock's submission to the Bulletin was followed 23 years later with this article from James Barrows. He noted the similarities of the movement and the use of rotating cards like the Grand Union clock. His article listed patents related to the calendar movements, but any details on the manufacturers still remained a mystery. This is a picture of the bottom of the door glass of the Grand Union Hotel clock. Who was the Calendar Clock Company, here listed with Hartford, Connecticut, and what is the referenced patent? On September 19, 1854, John Williams of Hartford, Connecticut was granted patent number 11713 for perpetual calendar clock movement. Interestingly, on this same day, Akins and Burritt of Ithaca, New York, were also granted their patent, number 11711, for perpetual calendar clock movement. The Akins and Burritt patent would become the basis for all the Seth Thomas perpetual calendars manufactured from 1860 to 1876. Williams asserts his calendar mechanism can be connected to any clock movement. It is a first-level perpetual calendar that advances the day of the month from 29 February to 1 March in a leap year. As we will soon see, this is the mechanism that will be used in all the Calendar Clock Company gallery clocks. It is placed on the top plate of the time movement. I refer to wheel E, located in the lower center of the diagram, as the 31-day wheel. The arbor of this wheel drives the day of the month or date hand. The 40-year wheel, located at the 7 o'clock position on top of the 31-day wheel, has 48 pins or notches, one for each month, that sets the height of a lever to advance the 31-day wheel the extra number of days in a short month. John Williams assigns his patent to F. Curtis and Company. He is granted a second patent on 24 July 1855 using a different 4-year wheel design for advancing the 31-day wheel at the end of short months. In 1853, 54, and 55, John Williams was listed in the Hartford City Directory as a clockmaker. Per this article in the Pittsburgh Morning Post, dated May 21, 1856, it appears he left Hartford and went to New York to manufacture calendar clocks, using his second patent under the firm Williams and Wills. I have not yet found the firm listed in the New York City directories, nor am I familiar with any clocks made by the firm. It appears he left Hartford about the time the Calendar Clock Company was officially created. Who or what was F. Curtis and Company, the assignee of John Williams' first patent? Frederick and Persis Brown Curtis of Hampton, Connecticut, had several children, including Frederick Stephen Curtis, born in 1801, and Joseph Stewart Curtis, born 1815. Both brothers would become silversmiths and work in Connecticut. Joseph Curtis had a factory in Hampton, Connecticut, manufacturing German silver that was lost to fire in 1840 with no insurance. He was arrested and put on trial in Boston in April 1841 for obtaining goods on false pretenses. His petition for protection under the Bankruptcy Act was heard in Hartford on March 18, 1842. That same year, Frederick and Joseph Curtis were listed as silversmiths and living with their brothers Russell and John at 7 Ellery Street in Hartford, Connecticut. This 1848 clipping from the Hartford Courant gives notice that Joseph Curtis has joined with his brother Frederick continuing business under the firm of F. Curtis and Company. Additionally, George R. Curtis was working with Frederick and Joseph. George was born in Springfield, Mass. In 1823 and moved to Glastonbury, Connecticut, where he lived for most of his life. I believe he may be their nephew, but have not been able to prove this definitively. The Curtis brothers purchased 18 acres of land along Salmon Brook in Glastonbury, Connecticut. Before 1850, the plant of F. Curtis and Company was erected, and they moved to Glastonbury from Hartford. This charcoal drawing by Richard Richter, circa 1855, shows the factory complex in a section of Glastonbury that was called Curtisville by this time. This is an 1850 endorsement of F. Curtis and Company published in the Hartford Courant. They employ about 225 hands with sales the previous 10 months of $235,000 and use nearly a ton of coal a day to drive their steam engines. Wells' Directory of Hartford in 1850 gives a list of products made: spoons, forks, butter knives, casters, spectacles, spectacle cases, tobacco boxes, etc. Offices at No. 1 Asylum Street, Hartford, and 85 William Street, corner Maiden Lane, New York. There is no mention of clocks at this point. So, where is Glastonbury in Curtisville, Connecticut? This is an early 19th century map of Connecticut. Hartford and Glastonbury are in the middle of the state. Bristol, home of the American Clock and Watch Museum, is just west of Hartford. In the bottom right side, just a few miles south of East Hartford, is Glastonbury. Curtisville is located in the northwest corner of Glastonbury. This is where F. Curtis and Company and the Calendar Clock Company were located. Here is a detailed map of Curtisville in 1855. It is known today as the Curtisville Historic District. It is bound by Naval Avenue across the bottom and Pratt Street on the top. The map shows the location of F. Curtis and Company, going by the name Fred Curtis and Company's Spoon and Spectacle Factory. The brothers had an office in Hartford on Asylum Street, but lived in Curtisville. Frederick's and George Curtis's homes are located together in the upper left side on the corner of Pratt and Naubach. Joseph Curtis and the Curtis livery stables are located in the top center along Pratt Street. The map also shows the location of F. Curtis and Company Lumberyard, F. Curtis Store, and boarding houses for the workers. This is a picture painted by James Rabbith titled Curtisville. The factory is in the background with boarding houses for the workers making up some of the homes seen here. Note the Connecticut River in the top left. Naubach Avenue is running across the bottom of the picture. Joseph Curtis's house and the associated stables are to the right of the factory. It was reported that one of the manufacturing buildings built in Curtisville housed the rolling department. Previously, they had to haul material to Waterbury for this process. F. Curtis and Company went into insolvency in 1854 with $500,000 in liabilities. In a restructuring, they moved all assets over to the Curtisville Manufacturing Company. The stockholders were Frederick and Joseph, holding 5,596 shares, and Roderick Fowler, holding a token 4 shares. Only $100 was paid in cash, with the $139,900 paid with a conveyance of the property of the manufacturing establishment. The following year, on August 17, 1855, the Articles of Incorporation for the Calendar Clock Company were created. The company was organized for manufacturing and dealing in calendar clocks and other related objects in Glastonbury, Connecticut. Note the stockholders. Roderick Fowler, the one holding 4 shares of the restructured Curtisville Manufacturing Company, was Justice of the Peace in Glastonbury. George R. Curtis, possible nephew of Joseph and Frederick, is the largest shareholder. Edwin Allen, we will get to shortly. Neither Frederick nor Joseph Curtis was a shareholder in the Calendar Clock Company. This was probably a good thing, as they were always in financial difficulties and would be in and out of court for the next 4 years. This is part of a transcript from the Joseph Curtis conspiracy case that was being covered by the Hartford Courant. Per Mr. Hill's testimony, George R. Curtis took me by the collar and throat and attempted to put me out. He said if I ever came into the office again, he'd break a chair over my head. He called me a damn Boston blackleg. While all the drama was happening with F. Curtis and Company and the Curtisville Manufacturing Company, the Calendar Clock Company commenced business. This is a notice of their first annual meeting. The date of August 15, 1855 is 2 days before the date of their Articles of Incorporation. The November 1855 issue of Scientific American reported on the Great Fair of the American Institute in New York City. In addition to describing the splendid specimens of wagon spring 30-day clocks by the Atkins Clock Company, they noted the large and beautiful calendar clock exhibited by Joseph S. Curtis of Hartford, Connecticut, which shows the hours and minutes as well as the days of the week, month, etc., patented last year. In the most recent issue of Scientific American, they're not reporting on perpetual calendar clocks correcting for leap year, but if we should be continuing to add leap seconds. An interesting article, same topic, slightly smaller scale. The second annual meeting of the Calendar Clock Company is to take place at Curtisville, Connecticut in 1856. Edwin Allen is secretary, and as we will soon see, the central figure of the Calendar Clock Company. Current, 28 June, 1858. The Calendar Clock Company has been in business for 3 years. This notice announced the placement of one of their clocks in the Charter Oak Bank. It states, the woodwork of this clock is made of oak, and the carving, which is elaborate, is from the real Charter Oak tree. It is a 30-day movement with a perpetual calendar. A quick aside for us non-Connecticut attendees, including myself. The Charter Oak tree is where the Charter of Connecticut was hidden in its trunk on October 31, 1687, so not to be confiscated by the newly appointed governor, Edmund Andros. It was resumed on May 9, 1689, and served as Connecticut's state constitution until 1818. The tree itself finally fell in a violent storm early in the morning of August 21, 1856. Many relics were made from the tree. The governor's chair in the Connecticut Senate chamber, the chair for the mayor, veneers for pianos, and according to the previous article, the carvings on the Calendar Clock Company clock hung in the Charter Oak Bank. Connecticut State Fair, October 1858. The Calendar Clock Company showed one of their calendar clocks. They run 8 to 30 days according to pattern. They state a most beautiful finished clock with imitation of carved oak frame. Joseph S. Curtis is still the company's agent, though his address has changed from number 1 to number 10 Asylum Street in Hartford. With Joseph Curtis acting as the primary agent, Edwin Allen would be the central figure of the Calendar Clock Company. He was an extraordinarily gifted inventor with over 40 patents to his name, including 2 calendar clock patents that were used in the clocks. In addition, he was a major stockholder and secretary of the company. He was born in Windham, Connecticut on March 27, 1811. His parents, Amos and Lydia Allen, had 9 children, of which Edwin and his twin brother Edward were the youngest. His father was a cabinet maker and farmer on the west side of the Shattucket River. Windham, located in Windham County in the northeast corner of the state, is only 10 miles from Hampton, Connecticut, the home of Frederick and Joseph Curtis. Joseph was 4 years younger than Edwin, but both boys were ambitious and interested in mechanics. At some point, they became acquaintances, and their professional paths would cross several times. When Edwin was 29 years old, he received his first patent for a stencil plate, or apparatus for facilitating the painting of signs, marking boxes, bales, goods, etc. On December 1, 1840, he ran a notice in Boston's Bay State Democrat advertising his new apparatus. Prospective patrons can call at the New England Type and Stereotype Foundry, number 66 Congress Street, Boston. His advertisement is endorsed by George A. and J. Curtis. George R. Curtis will be part of the Calendar Clock Company. I do not know if George A. is a misprint, but George R. would only have been 17 years old at this time. In addition to his patented stencil, he developed machinery to automate the creation of wood type for printing. He quickly established himself as a source of wood type for Mr. George Nesbitt of Spear and Nesbitt in New York City. Many specimens of his type were exhibited at the Fair of the Franklin Institute in 1837. Chromatic types, which are made to print in 2 or more colors, were first produced as wood type by Edwin Allen. This picture is an example of chromatic type. In the 1850 census, Edwin and his wife Ruth were still living in Windham, Connecticut with their 3 boys, Edwin Jr., Chaz, and Edward, ages 12 to 7. In 1852, after 15 years building up his wood-type manufacturing capabilities, and filling many printing houses across the country with his wood type, the business was acquired by a Mr. Cooley of the Printer's Warehouse in New York City. He was 41 years old and looking for new opportunities where he could apply his mechanical skills. About this time, he became a keen player for the soon-to-be-incorporated Calendar Clock Company. Whether he approached Joseph or George Curtis, or it was the other way around, I do not know. In 1855, Edwin Allen is now a shareholder and director of the Calendar Clock Company. He and his family have moved to Glastonbury, Connecticut, while he focuses his efforts on improving and manufacturing the new calendar clocks. He applied for and received 2 patents in 1856. His first was an improvement to the J. Williams patent, ensuring the calendar mechanism would work in any position for marine applications. The second, shown here, made several improvements on the calendar mechanism. Edwin Allen patented the small leap year wheel integrated into an annual change wheel that rotated a quarter turn each year, as shown in Figure 2 above. This replaced the 4-year wheel. Many perpetual calendar clock manufacturers, such as Seth Thomas and the Ithaca Calendar Clock Company, use some version of this wheel to set the height of a lever or arm to properly adjust the advancement of the 31-day wheel for short months. His patent is referenced in numerous subsequent calendar clock patents, including the Ithaca, New York-based Nix Brothers 1860 patent. His patent included a locking mechanism for the month of the year train to prevent the month indicator from being inadvertently advanced. He also described a mechanism for displaying the year using 3 rotating plates shown in the bottom of the figure on the left. Interestingly, the clock supports the years 1800 to 2799. 200 years down, 800 to go. Very forward-thinking, though as we will see shortly from a practical standpoint, it was either with just 2 rotating plates that ended in 1949. So, what were the clocks manufactured by Edwin Allen and the Calendar Clock Company of Curtisville, Connecticut? To date, I'm aware of 4 complete Calendar Clock Company gallery clocks and 1 clock case, and have been fortunate to complete a detailed survey of 3 of them. The company's main product was large, ornate gallery clocks approximately 36 inches in diameter. The company stamped the movements of all the gallery clocks I've seen with a production number. I cannot determine if it represents a total production number or an annual production number similar to the Ithaca calendar clocks. I've used these numbers to identify each of the gallery clocks. This is gallery clock number 3. Note the location for the company is given as Curtisville, Connecticut on the dial. The Grand Union Hotel clock showed Hartford, Connecticut on the glass door. We'll come back to this later. With the front of the case removed, you can see the movement with the cards or fans in place. The Perpetual calendar components are all installed in the lower half of the front plate on each clock. A majority of the clock's components are either stamped or scribed with the number 3. The key calendar components in all the clocks are the 24-hour wheel, which is driven by the motion works, the 31-day wheel with the attached perpetual mechanism, and the associated wheels to drive the day of the week and the month of the year cards. The 31-day wheel with the attached perpetual mechanism and their interaction are what is described in the John Williams 1854 patent. The notched first wheel and lock on the month of the year train is part of Edwin Allen's 1856 patent. The time movements are all single train, spring-driven fusee movements with anchor escapements and maintaining power. This is gallery clock number 15. Same dial as number 3, though the patent is not listed at the bottom. The case has gesso floral decorations, and it appears that the whole case front was gilded in gold. With the front of the case removed, you can see the movement with the cards or fans in place. Though I did not have the opportunity to survey this movement, a quick inspection showed many of the same features matching that in gallery number 3. Again, some of the components stamped with the production number 15. Gallery clock number 38 is 24 inches in diameter with a solid walnut front. The dial on this clock has been recently repainted, so it did not match the others. It has a very similar layout to the 36-inch galleries, with some of the components modified to fit the smaller case. The calendar movement also incorporates Edwin Allen's locking mechanism on the month of the year train, same as number 3 and number 15. And notice the same time movement layout as the others. Again, many of the components stamped with the number 38. What conclusion can I draw from the mainspring barrel ratchet wheel being stamped number 10? An extra from an earlier clock that didn't fit? Or is it possibly the number of clicks to preset the tension of the mainspring? Gallery clock number 42. Note that this clock now has an aperture opening showing the year, replacing the Calendar Clock Company signature on the dial. Having a year indicator was not part of John Williams' initial or subsequent patents, but was part of Edwin Allen's patent in 1856. Though this model added a year indicator, it has to be manually advanced each year, as it is not connected to the movement. Instead, the cards are screwed directly to the case. It also uses 2 instead of 3 wheels, limiting the display to the years 1850 to 1949. From a practical standpoint, 100 years was probably more than sufficient for any of the prospective customers. Note the standard stamping of the production number on the components. Though all the components on the calendar mechanism are basically the same, there are always variations between the clocks. Some of the wheels are spoked. The teeth of the 31-day wheel vary. Sometimes pins are used and sometimes tabs are used to advance the wheels. They never completely standardize the components to support mass production. Note that the locking mechanism on the month of the year train is no longer there on this clock. I believe the roller pawl was sufficient to lock the train. The tide movement on this clock has had some later repairs. There's the simple anchor pallets and the reverse-mounted deadbeat escape wheel to work with the anchor escapement. The time movements are very English in nature. I'm not aware of anyone in the U.S. producing heavy, brass, English-style fusee movements as a source for the Calendar Clock Company. I've shared my surveys of the movements with several horologists from the UK. The general consensus is they either brought some of the components from possibly Liverpool or copied the components locally. The large galleries were made with eastern hemlock and or Douglas fir. Many decorative gesso elements were added and gold gilded. The exposed wood sections appear to have been false grained or gold gilded. Atkins was making gallery clocks in the 1850s. Did they get the cases made, or did they make them in-house? They had a lumber company, the large manufactory, and the expertise. Edwin Allen had apprenticed as a cabinet maker under his father. I think either case, no pun intended, is plausible. What about the monumental gallery clock that hung in the Grand Union Hotel? The clock is a bit of an enigma with many differences from the gallery clocks that appear to be their main product line. It was most likely a custom order. The clock is big. It is 84 inches tall and 42 inches wide across the dial. Note that the day of the week and month display has moved to the inside next to the center arbor to facilitate the time dial using the full dial face and the insertion of a subsidiary seconds dial. The movement is not numbered like all the gallery movements. It is a much larger movement weighing 9.5 pounds and approximately 12 inches in length. The 5 pillars use steel screws instead of pins to secure the top plate. It is a 30-day movement with a deadbeat escapement where all the galleries have anchor escapements. The movement does drive the year indicator fans. It covers the years 1850 to 1949, like gallery clock number 42. Another difference between this clock and the regular galleries is the quality of the time train components. The wheels are more standardized and a finer quality. The pinions are of a finer finish. The second wheel and center wheel are identical with the exception of the pinions. Though the door glass mentions John Williams' 1854 patent, this Perpetual calendar movement follows later patents. The Perpetual calendar component uses Edwin Allen's 1856 patent, though it does not incorporate his separate leap year wheel to set the height of February, therefore requiring a straight 4-year wheel. The inscription on the front plate, April 23, 1869, by E. Allen, generates more questions. By 1860, there are no further references that I can find to the Calendar Clock Company. Was he asked to do repair work on the clock in 1869? Or did he make this clock in 1869 for the Grand Union Hotel? The label on the door glass shows Hartford, Connecticut, where the dials of the gallery clocks say Curtisville. Was Joseph Curtis still acting as an agent out of Hartford? And did he ask Edwin Allen to make this clock for the Grand Union Hotel? So what happened to the Calendar Clock Company? By 1861, the Seth Thomas Clock Company was advertising their calendar clocks with agents around the country, soon followed by the B.B. Lewis calendar clocks coming out of Bristol. The Calendar Clock Company, with their heavy movements, large brass components, and non-standardized parts, ensured they would never be able to compete with the mass production capability of the other perpetual calendar clock manufacturers, such as Seth Thomas, the Ithaca Calendar Clock Company, and the Bristol Boys. So did they move? This article is from the New York Evening Post, dated December 10, 1858, and it describes the losses from the Center Street fire. Could the Calendar Clock Company that just moved into the building be our company from Curtisville? The Curtisville Manufacturing Company, that was owned by Frederick and Joseph Curtis, continued to have financial difficulties after the 1854 reorganization. In 1859, Thomas J. Vail assumed the presidency, and the Curtis family no longer appeared in the Hartford listings. With the advent of the Civil War, the manufactory switched to production of firearms and was again restructured in 1863 to the Connecticut Arms and Manufacturing Company. Remnants of the original buildings are still there today. The 1863 expansion for the Connecticut Arms Manufacturing Company replaced everything above the first level of the main building. The headstone shown above is over one of the old entrances. Frederick Curtis died on February 24, 1862, at the age of 61, only a few years after T.J. Vail had taken over the Curtisville Manufacturing Company and moved into Frederick's old residence in Curtisville. He's buried in the Still Hill Old South Cemetery in Glastonbury. His younger brother Joseph would continue to live in Curtisville with his wife Celia and their son Edwin. Both Joseph and his son Edwin listed their professions as agent in the 1870 census. He died on November 13, 1875, and is buried in the St. James Cemetery in Glastonbury. Was his son Edwin named after his friend, Edwin Allen? I was never able to ascertain if George Russell Curtis was a nephew of Joseph Curtis. Joseph did have an older brother named Russell, who was old enough to be George's father. George spent most of his life in Curtisville, now Norfolk. In addition to being the largest shareholder of the Calendar Clock Company, he owned a store, became the first postmaster, and served in many terms as Justice of the Peace, and served in the state legislature representing Glastonbury. He is buried in East Hartford. Edwin Allen had moved to Essex, New Jersey by 1860 and was working with George Nesbitt again. He built the first stamped envelope machine for George F. Nesbitt and Company, and received a patent in 1863 for his printing press feeding attachment. Around 1865, he organized the Allen Manufacturing Company to manufacture the new Allen rotary envelope machines. He would continue to earn multiple patents related to printing presses throughout the 1860s. By 1870, he was back in Norwich, Connecticut, and was working as a machinist. He died on January 4, 1891, at the age of 79, with his last listed profession as an inventor. In summary, the Calendar Clock Company was co-located with the Curtis Brothers Manufactory in Curtisville. The Calendar Clock Company produced at least 42 large perpetual calendar gallery clocks between about 1854 and 1859. My best guess is that the Grand Union Hotel clock was a custom order and made in 1869. This is based on the inscription on the front plate, dated April 23, 1869, by E. Allen. Edwin Allen was back in Connecticut from New Jersey by the 1870 census as a machinist. It listed Hartford instead of Curtisville. It would be part of the major updates that occurred at the Grand Union Hotel in the late 1860s. And to get a very grand clock, none of the other calendar clock companies made anything this large or ornate in the 1860s. And finally, it would make a grand finish to the Calendar Clock Company story. This project would not have been possible without all the help and assistance of many friends and colleagues. A special thank you to Dale Beskey, who not only helped with the research, but also reignited my interest in the Calendar Clock Company. Fellow collectors Ben, Ted, and Chris, Mary Jane for her research assistance and encouragement, Jamie Perillo at the Saratoga Springs History Museum for help finding all the pictures of the Grand Union Hotel clock and the history of the hotel, Phyllis and Sue at the Historical Society of Glastonbury for Curtisville's history. I would like to welcome Gil Tyler and Steve Knapp, who are both here today. Gil was my gracious host and tour guide in Glastonbury, and Steve is the present owner of the Curtisville Manufacturing Company site and gave Gil and I a great tour of the facility. Most importantly is the support from my wife Cathy, who came on many of the trips across the country in search of all the pieces that helped make this story possible. Lastly, for those of you that sit through the credits at the end of a Marvel movie in the theater, you occasionally get a short clip or preview of things to come. So here is mine. While searching through past issues of the Franklin Journal, I found this submission by Alexander Young of Camden, South Carolina. Dated June 20th, 1827, it provided a detailed description of a calendar mechanism that can be added onto any clock and will correctly adjust the day of the month for the short months. The submission included a sketch of the 31-day wheel and the associated 4-year wheel. It was quickly obvious that John Williams copied Alexander's design with one small modification and patented it in 1854. So who was Alexander Young? Well, that is a story for next time. Thank you for listening.